today we are going to be talking about a land suit, and we are also waiting for Chief being join us today, but you all know him, so we have to introduce him personally today. So this is Anne Gilmore, and this is Dickie Costa, who were both involved with the case in various different ways. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves more specifically. But just to give you a little bit of context specific to this, so we've started talking about kind of the changes that started to happen in the 1970s. Right, we started to talk about that last week, and so this land claim, this lawsuit came about because this is around the time when things were really obviously beginning to change, right? So we're about probably less than a decade into a very obvious switch in the ways that Wampanoag people were able to access Mashpee, access different areas, roads, woods, things like that. More development was coming in, and also the political leadership of the town was changing. So no longer were the political offices held by majority Wampanoag people. They were held by majority non-Wampanoag people by this time. Turn it over.
Dickie, here in Mashpee, why don't you begin to put us back? Yes. Well, I was just kind of fresh out of law school in 1976, and did a year clerking with the federal judge in Virginia, and wanted to return to Boston, and got hired by a trial lawyer in Boston who had been hired as the chief trial lawyer for University of Wampanoag and their land claim in federal court in Boston. So I joined the legal team as the most junior member, having her represented a client in court before. I only got involved a few months before the trial actually began. This was in the fall of 1977. And the trial went on for, I think, a biblical 40 days and nights in Boston. And what happened was that it was not a land claim trial. The Mashpees had brought a suit to recover their ancestral land, which had been taken illegally, and that issue was pretty well researched and pretty well documented. But the town, which was now in control of the non-native population, and the real estate developers, who were sometimes wanting to say it to the town officials, could not let it get to the land claim issue. So they raised a roadblock and said, well, whoa, before we talk about land, I mean, who are these people? They say they're a tribe, they say they're Indian. I mean, let's let them prove that. I mean, we can't have a trial on land until we know who are these people and do they qualify to sue for their land. And the tribe objected and said, it's not up to a federal court and a jury of non-native people like picked off the street to decide whether we're a tribe or not. I mean, there's a federal agency that determines that. So if we have to go through the federal agency to get that determination, so be it, we'll get that, and then we'll get a land claim. And the real estate developer's like, we can't wait for that. We need to clear the title to this land. So the judge said, yeah, I don't see why we can't have a jury decide if they're a tribe or not. And, so began not the land claim trial, but the trial of tribal status. And the judge had no idea what the requirements were for tribal status. We said, well, then tell us what we have to prove. And he said, I don't know what you have to prove, but I'm going to hear all the evidence that you all put forth. And then at the end of the trial, I'm going to tell you and the jury what you had to have proved. Well, that's no way to go into a trial, not knowing what it is that you have to prove. So, anyway, there were a number of people from the tribe who testified. Vicky here was the youngest by far, 17 years old, I think at the time. And she can tell you about that experience, but there were many expert witnesses, historians, anthropologists, sociologists, and many tribal members testifying. So let me turn over to you now.
Okay, my name is Vicky Costa Wakanabo, and I lived in Mashpee most of my life. And back in the day, it was only us Mashpees there, pretty much, just a very few outsiders anyway. And we always did our traditional stuff every day because we had no other choice. Y'all would all come from a big family with mostly 4 or 5 of us in the one center of Mashpee, which is down at the corner now. We still call it our center, not New Seabury Center, but, or not, whatever that is down there. I don't know what it is, Commons? The Commons is not the center of Mashpee. Yeah. So that's probably about it. We're still just a little group of people, not huge.
So if you know where the country store is, where 130 and Great Neck Road North intersect, Vicky lived right there to the north, just right next door to where the town hall is now.
Hey, down here.
That's the center of Mashpee.
That was our school. Anyway, you already knew that. Library across the street, church is still there. Yeah.
Were you up street or down street, Vicky?
We were the main street.
Okay.
We didn't have down streeters. They couldn't come up street. But they were down streeters, they were okay. Because we had the pond, the Mashpee Pond.
And Vicky, how did you get involved in the trial?
How should I be involved? That I really didn't know. It was just, I think, was you guys just asking people questions around town?
Yeah, the tribe was suggesting people for the lawyers to talk to. Also, the defendants, the real estate developers were subpoenaing people to depositions, to also get information from them. Did you, were you subpoenaed to a deposition or?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
I don't think I'd be one of them that they would consider because I was more traditional person that kept with the singing, the dancing, and storytelling, is just hanging with our relatives, our close relatives, doing things that are really out there in the community. Not out there in New Seabury anyway.
So, now I put this in a little bit of context. During the early 70s, and Vicky was a part of the Mashpee 9, unbeknownst to me, and she was telling me that this morning. So she had been up there singing with the guys up on that hill. But it came to the point in the early 70s, a lot of pan-Indianism was taking place across the country. So there's a lot of intertribal visitation and a lot of mobility. And while I wasn't here all the time, I was away, Mashpee felt that as well. And with the influx of non-natives coming in and again building homes on the rivers and the waterfronts where our ancient ways, where we went to fish, where our paths were to go hunt, they felt like we were losing our identity, and if we didn't do something immediately, we would no longer be able to be the people that the Creator made us. And so the land suit was filed. NARF, Native American Rights Fund, came in to assist in that effort, and they had assisted, I think, with the with the main land claims with the Passamaquoddies and Penobscots just prior. Was it just prior, I believe, or during that same time? And the thing that hit the town is that titles were tied up, banks wouldn't lend, real estate companies were going out of business. The selectman, George Benway, the selectman for the town of Mashpee, owned a real estate company, and people's lives were impacted, both native and non-native, and it really created a lot of animosity, even between people that had been allegedly positive and good acquaintances, people that had grown up with one another in the school systems, for instance. And so thus began kind of us against them type of battle, and the money started rolling in. We are a small tribe still. I think our enrollment just barely maybe reached 3,000 with all the new births. So back then, prior to federal recognition, basically our people moved away, but basically Mashpee was who we were. And we welcomed our relatives home. But we were fighting against people and corporations with lots of money and lots of backing. And so St. Clair, the last name of the attorney for the town, was the attorney that worked, I think, during the Nixon administration, I think with Watergate, if I'm not mistaken. So you can kind of just, if nothing else, kind of see us against them and what we were facing as a people with this really big machine that was coming at us. And there sets the content.
Just a brief historical context, I think would be important to understand, is that from the beginning, the Mashpee peoples, fought the encroachment on their land from the English, and it was happening, all over the Cape. And in 1665, there was a white missionary that was trying to Christianize the Mashpee people, and he saw all the efforts to encroach upon their land, and he saw what was going on all around them, and he got some more English lawyers involved, and there was a deed from the local sachems or leaders on Cape Cod deeding this land, because the sachems in the native practice had the ability to allot land, not permanently, it was not ownership, but just to allot land. So they got the sachems to allot the land, whatever, 16,000 acres in Mashpee, to the Mashpee people and their descendants. This is in the deed, and their descendants forever, unless they all agree to give it up. So this was common land. This was a deed for common land for the Mashpee people. And from that date forward, and that deed was recorded in the Plymouth colony's, general court. And then later when it became the United States of America and Commonwealth of Massachusetts, it was recorded and confirmed in the Massachusetts court. And despite that deed, there were efforts all along on encroachment, but the Mashpees were successful at fighting that off. Until the 1869, 1870, when the state came in, and this was happening all over Massachusetts and all over the country. The state came in and said, okay, it's time for you to give up your common land. That's kind of an outdated concept. It's time for you to become a town and to be citizens of the Commonwealth like everyone else. but let's have you debate it and let's have you vote on this. So, there was debate and there was a vote, and the vote by the Mashpees was not to let go of their common land and not to become like a town. And the state said, well, okay, well, we've consulted you, but now we're gonna do this. So, they arranged to sell off the common land against the will of the Mashpee people, against their deed to the land in common. And they made, they took it from being really a reservation, one of the first areas reserved for natives in New England, into being like a town with individual land ownership. And so that's when the illegal taking took place. But for another 100 years almost, nothing really changed on the ground in terms of development. Like at the time that the suit was filed, Mashpee was still 80% undeveloped. And for those 100 years, the people had just continued to live with access to all the land. I mean, people did own their homes and their individual plots, but the so-called common land was still available to everyone. So, some people question, like, why did they wait till now, in the 1970s to file this claim? Well, it's because that's when the land started being developed and fences went up and, it became clear to people that they were losing what they had just had since the 1600s in terms of access to the country.
Vicki, can you maybe speak to that a little bit in terms of like how, as a tribal member, how access changed, or for whether you were for
And then one was waiting in the woods and couldn't go no further. The fence went up.
like how did that change things?
Well, you could no longer go there because then the private signs came up and the police came in and, yeah, things we used to do, we couldn't do it as much. But then you wouldn't see what was developed until they made a road in there. I think they're still doing the same concepts. Go in there, clear out the roads, make up their buildings, and after you see the new road going in and the development. Which is got a hand up in there.
Who was developers buying the land from?
Well, if you read the newspapers, what was his name? Benway? He was stealing after his own people, let alone everybody else. Because he was running the town at the time. Yeah. They were still doing the crooked things they always been doing, ever since they got in there.
The whole issue of using town money to hire St. Clair and a whole bevy of lawyers to oppose the tribe's land claim, when the tribe was only recently reduced from being the predominant majority of the town, but they were still a sizable part of the town, and they're paying taxes, and it's their town too, and, for the town leaders to decide, we're gonna use town money to oppose this suit when, half of the town was bringing the suit. And so that, that was questionable.
Was time cut.
Oh, was it ever found, if it was recorded and deed was recorded in Plymouth for common land, was that ever found to be illegal for Massachusetts to just take that and sell it? It wasn't their land to sell.
That's what the case that was filed was about, and that case was never heard. It has never been heard. The land claim has never been heard. And it became, blocked by this question of tribal status. And just to say a little bit about that, the trial on tribal status, which is kind of known as the land claim trial, but the land claim never got to be heard. from the very beginning, this was like this was 1977 in Boston, and I don't know if any of you were around then or, near Boston, but it was a time of great conflict in Boston around busing. And there was a lot of, anti-black, anti-busing behavior going on. Adults throwing rocks at buses, carrying black school children into, white neighborhoods. And there was just a lot of turmoil going on in Boston around this issue. And in his opening statement, James St. Clair, the town's lawyer, the developer's lawyer, really, addressed not just the question of tribal status, like questioning how could there be a tribe of Indians on Cape Cod? I mean, has anyone heard of that? But he went into racial slurs, and he said, we're going to not only show that this is not a tribe, but these people are not even Indians. I mean, look at them. They're black. And we in Boston, we know, when we see a black I mean, it was so outrageous. And, our Larry Schiavo, the main trial lawyer for the tribe, objected to this kind of a statement, an opening statement, and the judge let it go. And then the newspapers picked up on it and quoted Larry Schiavo as saying it was a racist opening statement. It was like a dog whistle to, racism. And the defendant's lawyers, brought Larry Schiavo in to see the judge and said, look what he's saying to the press. You've got to stop him. And Larry said, we have freedom of the press, and freedom of speech and strike. And the judge said, well, I think it's too prejudicial for you to be making these comments, as compared to prejudicial for St. Clair to be making these comments to the jury. Anyway, the judge put a gag order on Larry Schiavo, and all of the lawyers outside were talking to the press from now on. Another very disturbing thing was a lot of the Mashpee folks that came up to the trial were, proudly wearing their traditional clothing. The clothing that they wear when something important is happening, and they're, proud. So, people had various, regalia, and at some point, the defendants, the developers objected to that to the judge and said, it's prejudicial to have people here sitting, trying to look like Indians or something. And the judge stands up and says, yes, there will be no more wearing a costume to my courtroom. And here he is, a tall man in his, 50s. The only one in the courtroom wearing a long black gown. And there'll be no more costumes as a courtroom. He kept wearing his. But anyway, I'm just trying to give a sense of what the atmosphere was in the courtroom, and from the judge and from the defendant's side. And all of the historical accounts written by non-native historians, white missionaries, whatever, were allowed into evidence. But the one primary source written by the native peoples, written by William Apis, who was a Pequot, who came to Mashpee and worked with the Mashpees in the 1830s to regain control of the political control of their land. His first-person account of everything that happened was excluded by the judges being too biased. I had a hard time, just understanding how this could be. And, I was, I guess, an idealist then, but in the 1970s, how this did happen. Also, in terms of expert witnesses, the one native expert, Vine Deloria, who was a noted author, scholar, PhD, spoke, all over the country about tribal issues, was familiar with many tribes, was himself a tribal member. His testimony about what it meant to be a tribe was stricken from the jury's consideration because the judge said it was too loose. It's too. And then ultimately, when the trial was over and it was going to go to a jury, the judge came up with, the requirements and said that the jury should consider whether this group of people and their ancestors met his criteria on 6 different dates in history. And some of them, it was obvious why he picked them, but other dates, I didn't mind what he was thinking. But anyway, so ranging from 1793 to 1830-something to 1840-something to 1869, 1870, 1976, I think those are worse than these. Were they a tribe on those dates? Was there evidence that they were a tribe on those dates? And he said, once there's no tribe, if you find for any of these dates that there's no tribe, you can't find that the tribe comes into being at a later date. So, we objected to his definitions and his criteria and his dates and everything, but anyway, that's how it went to a jury. And they came back with findings that were inconsistent with his instructions because they said, well, we don't see any evidence that they were a tribe in 1793, which was the date of the federal law that we were suing under, but that's just because there was no record, what was going on in Mashpee on the date that law was passed, but that was a national law. But then there was a tribe in the 1830s and 1840s. But it disappeared in 1869 in 1870 when the state came in and sold the common land and made them like an ordinary town. And like, that's what we were suing about. And that's what was used to show that there was no tribe any longer without the common land. So we said, you can't rule against us on this basis because that's the whole point the suit was fought. And the judge who, at the end, you realized this before, declared himself a proud Mayflower descendant, in which case he should have recused himself from this trial. And he wrote in his decision denying tribal status that, this was a very likable group of people, whatever, and there's no reason that they couldn't be a tribe for any purpose under the law except for one purpose, which was the extraordinary claim of recovering land that was transferred in good faith. I don't know that distinction has ever been made in U.S. law that you can be a tribe for every purpose except for cutting your land. But anyway, I'm talking too much, but I'm just trying to give you a sense of your travesty that this trial was. So 30 years later, the tribe goes through, years and years of documenting and, proving their status to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Finally gets their tribal status, and now Mashpee's like almost completely developed, so we knew with that. Anyway,
Yeah, and sorry, one second. So just kind of to also speak to your question before, that the land claim that was originally filed that was never heard was what eventually ended up giving way to this, or the question about whether or not Wampanoag, the Wampanoag people were a tribe, is what led to federal recognition petition that was then ongoing, which Rachel's talking about, which we're going to talk, well, we could talk about today, then we'll just rearrange what we decide to talk about later. But that's where's that? What it turned into.
Were there any other woodland tribes that were involved in something similar in the neighborhood in Maine or Amphir or any place else in Massachusetts? Did anybody come with a similar type situation and say this happened to us too? Is there any indigenous support in the tribe?
You just said from restitution?
Yeah, so, just for your knowledge, there is a book called The Mashpee Indians, Tribe on Trial by Jack Campisi, and then a book, Restitution, that addresses both the Passamaquoddy, Penobscot, and Mashpee land claims, for lack of a better term, it's by Paul Brodeur, Brodeur, Restitution. And both of those tribes didn't have to go through a jury trial. And I think that's something, I was telling Vicki, I feel pain still for her as she was cross-examined, and her identity put on trial. And she was 17. I didn't realize she was that young when she was there. But it was quite offensive to me that they put to her the identity of her father, who was Cape Verdean, and her mother, that was Mashpee Wampanoag, and ask her questions to try to make her speak poorly of one aspect of her heritage or deny a part of her heritage, and try to stir up some conflict there. It didn't stir Vicki. As you can see, she's still got that same kind of solemn, quiet, peaceful demeanor. But to answer your question, yes, and those tribes received dollars, and they also received a certain amount of land. They didn't go through, again, a jury trial, which is still absurd to me, and just recently can't understand how our attorneys allowed such a thing, to go to trial on who we are as a people. There's some excerpts in here that talk about we weren't a trial. Our chief was, our leadership was nothing more than, where does it say? This is coming from St. Clair, the attorney for the other side. Their chief was an honorary title holder without power and with little influence. Their high level of intermarriage was not unique for a small isolated community. In their cultural identity, he scornfully argued, was restricted to a few recipes. And you have all been, most of you have been a part of what has, the previous workshops that have led up to today with this, this land suit. And you could provide testimony, because the information you received, a lot of it came from the missionaries, the non-Indians, the record keepers, for the colonists, etc. One of the elders, Selena Coombs, Kenneth Coombs' wife, Casey Coombs School, was badgered because she was describing a common recipe. We call it potato bargain. It's potatoes, onions, sliced thin. You put the potato, well, first you have to have a little salt pork, and then you take those bits out, or at least that's how we do it. And with some of that grease, you put in the potatoes, You slice the onions, you put a little flour, salt, and pepper, do that again. And traditionally, whatever meat you had in your home, if there was a good hunt or you had leftover meat, you would add to the potato bargain, and you added water and simmered. Bring it to a boil and simmer till the potatoes and the flour and the water all have a nice gravy, and that was a meal. And as she was describing it, she said, and today we use hot dogs, which we do. It's my favorite. and she was demeaned for that. Oh, hot dogs? That's not a native dish. I mean, that's what a lot of us had in our fridges. You know, hot dogs, they were cheap. But things like that, and I know for me, it's so demeaning. It still sits with me. So demeaning. You know, I think we all dealt with the subtle racism going through school. And you could hear the talk of your supposed friends about, say, the Rainbow Club or you know, some other aspect of social gatherings that we couldn't be a part of. But to have that overtly happen in a jury format was just hugely. And a lot of people have passed since then, but there's still a lot of people that had to endure that are still here. And those people are still carrying on the ways. And if nothing else, I think that's probably one of the things that resulted from the land suit is a stronger community and a stronger realization that our traditional ways needed to be practiced and continued and shared with our young ones.
Well, I was saying this, possibly Passmore party before, during, or after the Nasty.
Yeah, I think it was just before. I think it had just happened, and it was kind of like this was happening across the country. NARF was a big deal back then. I don't know if they're still in existence today. They are. Yeah. Native American Rights Fund. They were working with tribes around the country, and so in Indian country, even without cell phones and without a whole lot of communication, there was communication, and tribes had, like I said, Pan-Indianism, a lot of interaction and communication with tribes, even west of the Mississippi, and so we knew what was going on. Of course, newspapers and so forth, a little bit slower, but it was kind of like the earth was rumbling, and the Creator was telling us it's time. You need to act, because if you don't, then you won't be. You won't be. We're dealing with that right now too. Still, even with federal recognition, because we are the land, and the land is who we are. Water is who we are, and we're kind of in a crisis state right now. So we're still dealing with all of those issues.
Could I ask you, for example, did East Ham to the natives, they have given rights to fish on the beaches and to hunt and so forth in the woods. How do you view that? Is that like thanks to giving us that privilege, or is that like they stick it in your ear?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what I understand the question, because is it, are we talking
What the sentiment is when the town like East Ham goes to say, we're going to recognize you as a tribal member and give you a little certificate or a pass that says you can clam any place you want to and so forth, and you have the right to hunt in the forest.
That's not a town provision. That's a state right that tribal people have in Massachusetts, or well, not all, but that Mashpee Wampanoag people at least have in the state of Massachusetts to hunt and gather and practice.
How is that viewed? Is that like, thanks for giving me something I deserved or I have had, or?
I wouldn't say it's a thank you. I think it's just kind of like goes. I mean, it's not. I mean, I don't know exactly what the Eastham rule is or whatnot, but I think, I mean, in that case, it's already a state law, so it's really seems unnecessary, I guess, in that case. But I think that, you know, so Mashpee, I believe, is the only tribe, I think, in New England that's not a settlement tribe. Is that true? So we had gone through this 32-year petition for federal recognition following this initial land suit, and by going through this petition, we purposefully did not give up those rights. So the ability to hunt on our homeland, to fish on our homeland, to have access to these places was specifically maintained by doing that process. Some other tribes that used Congress to get federal recognition gave those rights up. And so I don't know what other tribes, if any, have those same kind of rights that Mashpee has to do that. And so it could be actually that maybe in Eastham, it's not specific to Mashpee people. It could be that it's, you know, broader than that, and that people from other tribes that don't have those same Aboriginal rights that we have, maybe that speaks to that more specifically. Yeah, but feel free to add to that, Vicky. That's like.
Well, chiefing to that, he's here. That's fishing and hunting rights.
He's asked,
Where can you go with them?
he was asked, well, the question was, how does it feel to be given back Aboriginal rights?
Well, I grew up with Aboriginal rights. When, as a young kid, it used to be like a badge when you're old enough to get a hunt license, because that meant you could go by yourself. But growing up, we'd go fishing, clamming or whatever, and my dad wouldn't have a license. He'd say, I got my womp rights, wherever we were. Remember, we were up in Kingston, and happened to be a good little clam bed over there. We started digging clams, and we were approached by a warden, and there was some back and forth. I don't remember, I was on the younger side, but I remember eating clams. Yeah, that battle has been going on for a long time. Our old chief Matark, Lorenzo Jeffords, who is from Aquinnah, but he lived on the mainland here. And he had multiple trips to the courthouse for fishing without, or the stories that I was aware of was for fishing without a license, which he stood upon his rights. You know, it was brought to the court, in which case I was as well. We brought to the courthouse, you know, for charges, and then it was always dismissed. It was an ongoing battle that you know, by the book, we always had the right, but the enforcement agents saw it differently. So there was this whole layers of bureaucracy and government that were impinging upon our rights, and it took a judge's ruling to admonish the wardens about respecting our rights as such.
Today in Mashpee, the Wampanoag tribe, do they own any additional land outside of Mashpee? I don't, is it Fall River or?
There's some land in Taunton, and I think we have land in Millborough as well.
But on the Cape, it's just what's here.
It's inside of Mashpee.
Is it, just wondering, is it a custom, like, for example, within the tribe, if someone has additional land to give it, do they give it to the family or do they give it to the tribe? Is that customary practice or no?
I mean, most family land, because families have retained control of land since the 1840s, 1830s. And that concept is kind of been the way that we go these days. The old practice of common land and tribal use of all lands, it's something that, because of the whole private property concept that is so the fabric of this land, that's a hard one.
I only asked that because in the town that I grew up in, it was a very large Seventh-day Adventist population. So it was a custom among the church that the church members, when they passed away, they gave the land to the church. And at one point, the church owned 30% of the town's lands. I just found that concept interesting, just wondering if there was anything similar to that practice.
You know, the past practice of the tribe is, I mean, ownership is a word. I mean, it's like the Irish own Ireland.
Yep.
But I mean, they don't own it. It's who they are. They live in Ireland, and that's their place. Ownership is something that comes into English common law. You know, we are from here. It's our land because the Great Spirit put us here. The ownership thing kind of came in later on, whereas within Wampanoag territory, all the land was shared and distributed among families. Or, you know, the tribal control was over all the land, and individual families would use it for the period that they were there. And then, no, it didn't go through families; it stayed within the whole of the people.
Thank you.
So you mentioned the judge, all these rulings by the judge, and you know, and all the money. I can, in my mind, all the money from the developers and everything else. You know, makes me ask this question about whether there was money falling to the judge or anything like that. Was any investigation, and anybody ever do any investigation, or did it feel to you like it was really part of the fabric of in the 1970s of society and the courts?
No, that's an interesting question. I don't recall that ever came raised as an issue, as something to investigate. I can't remember what that in the sense that the judge was corrupt in that way, but I don't think she even understood his bias, his corruption of fair play, you know, if you want, of justice. I don't think he was able to see it that way. No, because, I mean, it was so telling to me when he revealed himself to Terrier trial manslaughter to send that but why would he not accuse himself of his trial? Well, that article's corrupt. But anyway, I don't think, I mean, I have no reason because they money changed hands to them. Going on in each investigate that, but I think, you know, a lot of money was made by the developers in Mashpee and Rose, no, but by the law firms that were paid for with town money that hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And you also mentioned, what's that?
Sorry. Go ahead.
You also mentioned this was your first experience as a lawyer, right?
Yes.
So I'm just wondering how it for the rest of your career. I mean, in a trial like this and the experiences that you had witnessing all of this it's apparently didn't make much sense to me.
No, it really went against what I had learned in law school. And it certainly went against my year of working with a federal judge in Virginia. That, I mean, this kind of conduct would be unimaginable in his courtroom and a lot of the other courtrooms to witness. I mean, I'm sure it goes on, you know, a lot of places, but this level, this level of bias, then I feel like it's, you know, I had a false sense of Massachusetts, and perhaps all in New England, as being liberal. And we certainly, I'm you know, certainly thankful we're living in Massachusetts compared to a lot of other places. But you know, we from a, I've been doing research the past few years for my church. I go to a Unitarian church in Brookline, Massachusetts, and we've been uncovering our congregation's history of land dispossession from the native people and of enslavement to natives and black people. And it is shaking me to my core. I mean, just because that's not the way I learned things. You know, I didn't know that. And I don't think many of us know that. And it takes a lot of work to uncover it if you don't know it properly.
I'll just add to that, what you're saying, I forget your exact phrasing, but the idea that the judge probably didn't really understand that he was biased and that a statement like that maybe didn't seem malicious. I think that as, you know, this is 40 years ago, but also still, I think there is a understanding that Mayflower descendant, AKA whiteness, AKA mainstream culture, is normal, and everyone's gonna think that way, right? And so to think that a statement like that would be seen as surprising, I think is a lot of people wouldn't necessarily see that, right? That like, you know, that unconscious bias, that expectation that everything is that everyone has the same understanding about what's normal, right? I think that makes a lot of sense what you're saying. That probably didn't really see that as being a problem.
Can I just follow up to that? So I think the statement that he said about being a Mayflower descendant and then the evidence that he was throwing out because it was too loose, was there any thought from your perspective, the defense attorneys, to appeal that, or was that just not even considered? The decision that,
Yeah. Well, his ruling was appealed by the tribe. I wasn't involved in that and didn't work on it, so I don't know all of the issues that they raised. I know that in those days, you know, having practiced law, you know, just 20 years after that, I mean, things did begin to change somewhat. I'm not sure that a judge could get away with exactly those kind of rulings now, but, well, at least here, because, well, one example is, at the time, it was permissible, and the defendants did exclude the people of color that were put into the jury box. And they didn't have to give a reason, and they didn't have to justify it, and they couldn't object to it. So, you know, what was a somewhat multiracial jury to start with became an all-white jury very quickly, and that was not recognized as something objectionable in those days. So, yeah, I'm just, you know, I think there has been progress in some areas, in some places. It's done. And
I think, I think the question about, that you asked, after the trial, again, I'm not sure I was here, I was away, but, my thought would be just another white guy treating us like we've been treated, cutting our wood with the woodlot riot, incorporating our homeland into a town of Mashpee against our disapproval in writing. We may be knocked down for a little while, but the term resilience, and I guess, you know, that term comes and describes us from time to time, because I think that's really what it is, resilience. And we are who we are, and we're very conscious of that. And like I said, we're still dealing with some of those same types of issues in 2023, but we've been able to maintain quite a bit, and to me, that's awesome. You know, even sitting in these workshops and understanding that we're still here, is incredible to me. You know, I don't know how others see it, but to me, that's, you know, that was the aftermath of that, and as was said by somebody here, federal recognition proceeded after that, and it was a decades-long battle, but it occurred. And now we have other battles that we have to face. And the land buyback, the passing of our elders, where the homes are being purchased by non-Indians, right there on Route 130, on either side of where Vicky grew up, where my grandmother and my dad grew up, where Natana's dad grew up. The homes are being purchased, you know, by non-Indians, and as Chippy will tell you, because he lives in my grandmother's home. His neighbors are changing. No longer is it your relative, and it's changing the whole dynamic of us as a community. And we do have housing, as you all know. We have that 42-unit ghetto, I'll call it, because that's what it is. It's just a ghetto. It's just another housing complex, low income. And that's not who we are as a people. It doesn't perpetuate the dignity and the largeness of who we are as a people.
Thank you.
I think also thinking about that, this kind of jumping on that idea of the housing development too, like this whole span of time from the beginning of the land claim to now, and the changes that have happened in Mashpee and throughout, you know, neighborhoods, and, you know, like Route 130, for example, that was once, like, you know, I remember as a kid, like trick-or-treating up and down the road, but you couldn't really, well, I mean, you could do it, but you wouldn't be at every house. I wouldn't know everyone at every house anymore, you know? It's just a different landscape, a different layout than it once was. And this like time frame so much has changed, right? Like it's incredibly dramatic. The differences over time, and one of the things that I think we think about as a tribe, especially as like the, you know, like an organization as a tribal council and things, is the idea that our tribal people are homeless in our home, because there's a lot of them, right? So, and you know, it may not look like what we think of as homelessness, right? Like it's not like people sleeping outside of the Stop and Shop doors or anything like that, but it's still people, you know, sleeping in the woods, or, you know, couch surfing. And so we have to try to solve that as best we can. But what this has, like, what all of this development has done is caused this problem, right? Where people, you know, we all know we have a housing crisis on Cape Cod, right, which exacerbates that, and that's, of course, that touches everyone, not just tribal people. But the idea that this is our homeland and there's not another place to go, right? And most people have a place that's home. And we do too, but like people you can't live here, right? And this is a large part of that reason.
I'd like to ask Chiefy how all of that, do you remember how all of that made you feel? The way that we were put on trial for who we are?
At the trial, are you talking?
Yeah. Like even with your reflection on all of
Well,
that.
because it's interesting, there's, it came out in the pre-trial discussions, or what have you. Our attorneys asking me questions, you know, pre-trial, trying to formulate the questions he was going to ask during the trial. And so he says, well, how do you know you're Indian? Well, I flash back to this time. It's probably younger than a teenager. It's probably like 6, 7, between the 5th and 6th grade, maybe around there. And these kids came by the house, and they did that woo 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 thing. My dad was out. We were out working in the yard, whatever. And then they took off, and he took off. And he chased them down and took them home. And in those days, that's, you know, he grabbed them by the back of the neck and took them home and, you know, presented them to their parents and laid it all out. He was still mad when he got home, and this was a ways away. And he sat us all down, and he says, you know, in his words, he said, "You're Indian, and always be proud of it." So when Larry Shubo, the attorney, says, "Well, how do you know you're Indian?" I flash back to that time when he said those words, because that's the only time I ever remember him saying those words. And he was still, it took him a long time to calm down. But that wasn't when I knew I was Indian. I mean, we grew up dancing as soon as we could walk. I mean, recently I flashed back to this time when we were just little, and there was an old woman it was at Mashpee Powwow, back when it used to be behind the old town hall, is today's ball field. It was just a field. And there was an older woman there. She was from Connecticut. It was Trudy's aunt. She was a Skydecoke. She was little. So, I mean, and we were little, and almost looking at her eye to eye, she was that little. And we were dancing. We danced always at powwows. And she talked to us about Indian dance. It was like a tutorial, and I still remember it. And I have only recently realized who she was. But, I mean, she talked in ways that is what I understand today as Indian way. It's not how we talk like tutorially today, but it's a mannerism, it's an expression, it's some of it's wordless, a lot of body language, and a lot of eye exchange, and it kind of reinforced what I understood about Indian dance, but it made it clear, and it made it like the pass down kind of thing. It reinforced the connectedness of it all, and I mean, so that how do you know you're Indian? Because, you know, I don't know, because you have raccoon for dinner, or you wear moccasins half the summer, and you attend powwows and Indian gatherings all over New England, or, I mean, I don't know how you know you're Indian, any more than how do you know you're Irish or Italian or anything else. You're a part of gay culture that is an inclusive group that is I mean, we would dress in our regalia to attend many functions. A lot of, at the old Indian meeting house there, we attended a lot of functions there when they were raising funds to renovate it in the early 60s. We would dress in our regalia, we'd be driving in the car. People would see us and they'd make fun of us. And I mean, that's, that was part of life. You didn't get embarrassed. You knew that everybody's gonna make fun of you. It's America, you know? Indians are either the bad guys, you know, they're gonna come, you know, do all that stuff. That's just the way it is. You don't argue about it. You just stay on the path and go do what you're gonna do. So, I mean, I think a lot about that question, because I've met people who recently became aware of their Indian ancestry. So that it's like this, you know, they sit with their grandmother, so, oh, you know, you guys are Indian, you know, it's like, because of the lineal descent. Not that they were raised within a culture or anything, but they become aware of their Indianness. And it was not ever like that, and some people interpret it that statement as that, but it was just a day in the life, you know, and it had the backstory. It was not told, but you know, it was the backstory that was the key. You know.
And I was just flashing back on a past class where we were talking about there's this difference in value systems, and so like it's the language being talked by both sides. They just can't understand each other. It feels the same way with this question. You know, what makes you an Indian? And it's like that the courts couldn't understand that, and sure.
That question, I think it's like, if you turn that around though too, right? Like, if you think about like what makes you whatever, things are like nationality, ethnicity, whatever. Like there's nobody thinks to do that, right? You don't think to question the non-other, right? But it's the same thing, right? Like it's not a ha-ha moment unless it's an Ancestry.com thing or something, right? It just is that.
What age you do, you tend to go with what the family traditions, the foods you have, the things that your families do.
Yeah, food is a big part of culture.
Yeah. So the land claim has never been heard due to a large history of time needed to get the federal recognition of the tribe. Is there any current movement of, well, now that the tribe has federal recognition, can't there be an enclave? My understanding, and please jump in for anybody else who has more information about this. My understanding is that during the federal recognition process, part of the petition was like, in order to get the town support for that federal petition, there was a promise made that we would not go after any land. And I don't know if I don't know how strong that agreement is, if that's codified or anything, but that's my understanding.
I think that's a codified, and that's next week, and in 2 weeks, right? We have
Next week we're talking about federal recognition. Yep. Yeah. But in terms of like that specific agreement to not like, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was we wouldn't bring suit. But there are federal programs that allow and support tribes to purchase land back. And then once a tribe has economic income from economic development, surely we could be purchasing these. Most of our elders, I would presume, have mortgages still. And their children have homes and probably aren't able to assume yet another mortgage or whatever. But with income from economic development, we would be able to plan and be able to purchase these homes where our elders are passing, and there you see the for sale sign going up, and then a week later, the sold sign, which is hugely important for us, so.
Could it be something like in Barnstable, we have the land bank, right? So when people die and they have no heirs or whatever, or they donate land when they pass on or for whatever reason, and it goes into this land bank. So I don't know, I'm sure people have thought that to create such a thing. I agree, because you'd then have to pay the taxes on it, but tax on open space property is much lower. And I don't know how they work through that, but it has grown tremendously in Barnstable, tremendously. The land bank is just huge now. And it's amazing to me that the amount of property that people just leave to the land bank to then become open space, farmland, and other pieces of property. It's amazing to me.
Does it come under the ownership of the town or the?
No, it goes into the land bank. It's not the town. It's the Barnstable Land Bank that owns the properties. There's one on 149 that they just tore down. This beautiful old farmhouse. I'm sure it was dilapidated on the inside, but it was gorgeous. But they tore that down to make these just open fields, and they put a barn there called Resilient Roots or something on 149, and they've just done that. And somebody passed on and just left that land, and it goes all the way to the pond. It's huge. It's all walking trails and things. But it's just amazing to me that they do this, that they leave it to the land.
A 501c3.
I'm sorry,
The land bank is a 501c3.
I don't know those things. But it's also,
Where A-Love Land Dance Studio used to be, there's the Native Land Service. Is that part of the tribe, or is that there's their own entity? It's separate, yeah. But similar things, sort of.
people just leave their property too. That is, but I understand what you're saying, that if you still have a mortgage on it, that needs to be paid off before you can take it into your land bank. But I'm just amazed at these people, and that's what they do. They just leave it to the land bank.
We have received some land in that fashion. There's a big property in West Barnstable called the Nation House that was given to the tribe. An individual resides there currently. Also Moshop Farm off of, what's the name of that?
Say this new.
Moshop Farms was given over to the tribe as well. It was a horse farm.
So do you pay a lower tax rate because it's collective land, or because you're a tribe?
They're in trust, that land is in trust now, so it's not taxed. It's in federal trust.
Yeah.
Right, resources is, lack of resources is often the problem. I mean,
There's been money coming through the tribe, but the tribe itself doesn't have money. And it seemed like I don't know, it's the influx of funds when we first got federally recognized. I think a lot of that money, when you give poor people money, it's not the same as giving somebody that has money.
Right, there's a lot of need. There's a lot of needs, and I'm sure that-
And there's not a full understanding of how to utilize money. And I think that's, it's a learning process. It's good. Beyond housing needs, there's other cultural needs for land, hunting, fishing, ceremonial spaces, and many of our ceremonies require, being on water, and of course, water frontage.
Right.
Is a critical area, and there's a lot of hurdles there.
I know the, Herring Pond clan just got property, and they're so excited to get it back and start gardening and other stuff up there that, you know, it's nice to see that. I don't know how you grow that, but, you know, to grow that land.
Maybe one more question if anybody else has a question. Thank you, everybody. Thank you all for.
Thank you guys.